Generational trauma is like a fucking infection. And in light of my 4th Mother's Day alone, which is, it's basically not even a holiday, we're going to talk about how the infection spreads. And it's also going to keep me from crying. So there's that. Now, if you haven't watched any of my content before, I would strongly suggest that you do. But I'm using my own personal stories to sort of explain some of the concepts here because I'm literally living through this shit right now. And it's not fun. But if you haven't watched any of my content before, please go back through the videos because there's a whole bunch of stuff in the subtext that is actually very valuable. But my memory is shit, so I tend to repeat myself. Now, if you know anything about narcissistic family systems, you understand that there's an atypical structure. And this is not perfect, but basically narcissistic is bipolarized. There is one controlling parent that doesn't have access to their emotional side. There's one emotional parent that is typically manipulated into being basically a piece of Play-Doh. There ends up being one controlling child that's called the golden child and put up on a pedestal. And then there is this scapegoat child, which is always demeaned. The scapegoat and the golden child can change based on their parents' favor. And this is very important because that's how they condition the lemmings. That's how the lemmings are made. And the lemmings grow up and they still lemming. But how they're made in the first place is basically it's to save their asses, right? When the parent is demeaning the one kid, the other kid ends up being like another pliable piece of Play-Doh to ensure that they become the demeaned kid. Right? So the golden child will end up being this pliable kid that will follow the controlling parent basically off of a bridge to save their own ass. But in their head, that conditioning, the tendency to lemming to a controlling authority figure, as in they will literally plow over their values to follow the controlling authority figure, is something that's programmed in their brain from birth. Now, the golden child is taught to demean the scapegoat with the rest of the family. It's teaching. When I was a kid, I didn't know. Like when I was a kid, I was demeaned throughout my entire youth, but I didn't understand how neurologically maladaptive that was for my parent. I took that on as something wrong with me. It's nothing wrong with me. That parent has something wrong with them in that they have been programmed to demean the emotional side of the relationship. And I didn't realize that until I swapped into the golden child seat. So I lost 100 pounds. This is what I looked like at 16. I know, hot, right? I lost 100 pounds as soon as I ran away from home. As soon as I wasn't bipolarized, I got control over my food again. Went into the golden child role, and then the scapegoat swapped to somebody else in my family, and I got to be privy to my mother's anger for another person for 10 years. And this is something I'm going to add to the first article that you'll see come out in a series of articles that I'm releasing with an organization. 12 signs of how to pick out a toxic person is the first one is they're always pissed at somebody irrationally. They always talk about somebody in a negative manner constantly. And it's usually to the point where you're like, they're not that bad. And they're like, they're stupid. And you're like, oh, but they're not really that bad. Yeah, that means that they're not thinking rationally. They've been taught to hate that person. And usually it's almost like a vampiristic feeding. For me, it was my sister-in-law. And guess what? They're best friends, my mom and my sister-in-law now. It was then when I realized that the malice that she had for that one person was not logical. It was something broken in her head. And it was the same thing with my ex. When I met him, it was his sister. He was constantly talking about his sister in a negative manner. Like it wasn't even rational shit. He would get illogically pissed at the tiniest little things that she would do. And you start to understand that it's not necessarily about that. He's using that as an outlet for amount of energy that he has been used to regulating with a partner. But when you look at the generational lines, when you look at the one parent and then they teach the next kid how to be a lemming and demean the other side and then pack together, you start to understand that this malice has traveled now down 3 generations. They're all taught to hate the same kind of person. It's like it's an infection. Now, when I got divorced, right, and I started to come out with this data, and it's data, right? There's on paper how I got abused. The amount of people, like the amount of monkeys that lemming together with my ex to act against me was just, it was flabbergasting. And it was so illogical to me. It took me sitting down and really thinking about it to understand that this is why. This is why they all pack together logically. It's because they were all manipulated by their controlling parent. It's because the controlling parents won. The bad people won. Oh God, it hurts my head. But honestly, it's a pretty effective tactic because what they have done is they have made themselves a little pack of lemmings. Conversely, on the other side, most of the divine feminines, if they're not manipulated by the controlling people, which there are a lot, like if you look at coupledoms where there's a super controlling parent, usually the emotional parent either leaves or they're so compliant they look like they're fucking brain dead because they are. The divine feminines get pushed out of society, but they don't have a pack to go to. Right? They don't have a community of little brain lemmings that they can go to. They're pretty much left alone. Now, I moved into a community a year ago and I spent the first 8 months like pretty much holed up, crying at a computer, writing a report. But then I opened the door and started to open my brain to what was going on around me and figured out that everybody around me has already been malformed by like malicious gossip from either my ex who acted through a group chat or my mother who's manipulating people around me. Oh, I wonder why. Like the divine feminine is not supposed to be alone, but it seems that with these packs of monkeys, the divine feminine is basically forced into a position where they are alone all the time. People don't understand, but this is like a key way that basically like the divine feminine is being pushed out of the environment in a very aggressive way. My mother's playing it off like it's some sort of, oh, she's doing this project, sink or swim, sink or swim. You've never had to do anything alone. You've never experienced the kind of isolation that you put me in. Nobody has. And the fact that people judge people that are put into this isolated position for their decisions, like you have never been here either. Pack your judgment. You have no right to it. Now, I grew up in a family where my mother talked in lengths and had a whole bunch of trauma from her childhood because her mother struggled with a whole bunch of things. And we grew up in a situation where my mother talked and demeaned her mother all the time for that. And because of the procession of events, what she has done in my social isolation has put me into the exact position that her mother was in. And thus, all of the impacts of what has happened are now coming down on my child. So basically, because of my mother's actions, she is putting my daughter into the exact same position that she was in when she was a child. A whole bunch of history repeating. And a reminder again, I've been lied to about my father's will, and I don't care if I get a red cent from it. I want the truth, and I deserve the truth, and I have been lied to. So again, it is this law firm that lied to me about my father's will, and it is these three people that are connected to that file. I hope everybody else has a great Mother's Day.